Military History and Heritage Victoria. On behalf of myself and our committee, I welcome you to tonight's Zoom event. Tonight we're pleased to have Phil Dressing presenting the Dunera Boys, a family story. Oh, my screen's not moving now. Goodness. Phil Dressing is General Manager of the National Vietnam Veterans Museum, a position he's held since November 2016. Not a Vietnam vet himself, he was in the last National Service ballot in September 1972 at the age of 19. His date was not drawn. Phil was born and bred in West St Kilda. His early career was at the glass manufacturer Pilkington's Risk and Insurance Manager. After a move to Phillip Island, he managed the golf club for 8 years, worked in real estate for 2 years, and then worked for the Phillip Island Adventure Resort for 10 years. Now, a little bit of the process before Phil begins his speech. Phil will be answering questions at the end of the presentation. I'll invite you to send a question via chat message at any time up to including question time. You can do this by clicking the chat icon in the middle bottom of the Zoom panel. Address the question to anyone. When the time comes, I'll read your question beginning with your first name. Now you can leave your videos on during the session to give the session a bit more of a real audience feel, but you don't need to particularly, and bear in mind that people will be able to see you. As usual, microphones will be switched off. By now you should be on speaker view with your microphone off, and I now invite Phil to speak, and there'll be a little bit of time while he loads his presentation.
Well, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity of delivering this presentation, particularly on the coming out of COVID restrictions at 11:59 PM this evening. First, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which I'm presenting tonight, the Dunera people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. The photo shows my father Louis and mother Jean celebrating an anniversary, and I must say that mum and dad were both fairly active in the party sense, brought about, I guess, by a desire to have fun and prosper. We've got those technical difficulties again, Brent, so I'll continue on with hopefully with the screen. We've got these technical difficulties again, I'm afraid.
It's his problem, not sure. Gallery, switch to gallery view. We've got it. He's got it sorted out, obviously.
Ladies and gentlemen, it was working fine 15 minutes ago, always the way. We'll see how we go. The Dressing family, Louis and Jean, two siblings of that relationship, Philip and David. We were very much a close-knit, hard-working family, and mentioned earlier, enjoyed the odd party. Dad was a self-taught musician, mainly the piano accordion, and Dad would buy an instrument, get a tune out of it, and then go buy another one and repeat the process. New Year's
Phil, we can't
Recording?
see the slides.
Yeah, that's red. Does that mean
Okay,
it's
so yeah,
So
it's down here.
they're not getting the screen moving.
Not getting the slides. No, the screen share is not working.
Can you see it now?
No,
On page
nothing.
2.
Well, we can see your chin.
It could be a lot worse. Let me close and see if we can start again. How about now?
No.
Well, let me get out altogether.
Did you remember the setting from before? The single screen?
No. How are we looking?
You need
What's your chin, Phil?
to share it from down the bottom.
How
Here
are
we
we
go.
looking?
That's them.
Any good?
Yep.
Now you just have to be able to move it.
No, I still can't. We still can't move that. Yeah, I can't progress the screen from here.
Jason, have you got it up your end?
No, I don't.
I can progress it here. Just hang on. I've approved that, Jason.
Okay.
It's still frozen on the first screen. Hang on, you. Yeah, there we go. You've moved
Okay.
it. Yep.
Continuing on.
Yeah, now you need to move it back to the screen. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, let's again. We'll pick it up halfway down. News parties at Torquay were fairly robust events with Dad on the accordion, somebody else on the trombone, and clarinet, drums, trumpet, bugle, and the old bush bass. In his later years, Dad would record a tune on the accordion and accompany himself on the violin. I must say it was pretty dreadful. The outcome on the old twin tape deck. And Mum was very much a community-spirited person. She was awarded an OAM for her voluntary work at Prince Henry's Hospital over a long period of time. And as you're probably aware now, Prince Henry's Hospital no longer exists. I can never recall Dad hugging me and telling me he loved me, nor my brother, but he certainly didn't feel unloved. As I said earlier, that the family were very close-knit and hard-working. Let me try first, Jason. No, I can't move it. I'll have to leave it to you.
Jason hasn't got it. No, yep.
Yep. And the next one, yep. So Dad, back one if we can. So Dad was born on the 29th of March, 1917 in London. His mother, May, English, and his father, Jacob, was a German. And Dad was one of 4 siblings. Ludwig, as his name was, and Charles, Jean, and Herbert. May and Jacob divorced around 1923. And as is the process at the time, that Jean lived with Mum and the 3 boys lived with their father. Jacob was a chocolatier and found that he was unable to cope with the bringing up of the boys after an industrial accident, and left him blind. The boys were put into a German-orientated orphanage in London around 1924. Jacob unfortunately dies in 1937. Louis worked for Wiseman spectacle frame makers in London, but was dismissed because of his inverted commas German blood, close inverted commas. He was then employed by the German embassy in London as a messenger, mainly between German and Austrian embassies. Although later inquiries with the German embassy could reveal no information whatsoever about Dad's time at the German embassy. And then, of course, the British government declares war on Germany in September of 1939. After the fall of France and fearing a fifth front on home shores, the British government incarcerates Italian, Austrian and German males. The brothers Dressinger are arrested on the 9th of December 1939. Louis, as he became known, Bill and Fred, were held in a converted Butlins holiday campsite until around June of 1940. The Arandora Star was built in 1927 for the Blue Star Line. She measured 12,847 gross tonnage and was 502 feet long and 68.3 feet wide. She underwent modifications in 1928-29, increasing the tonnage to 15,501 tonnes and became a full-time luxury cruise ship. At that time, her publicised passenger capacity was 354. She underwent a further refit in 1936, but it's believed the passenger capacity was not increased at that time. At about 4 a.m. on the 2nd of July 1940, the Arandora Star sailed from Liverpool, and the passenger list was made up of officers and crew 174, the military guard 200, German interned males, including the 3 dressing boys, 479, German prisoners of war 86, and Italian interned males 734, making a total of 1,673, just a little bit beyond the publicised capacity of 354. Here are a couple of shots of the Arandora Star. Firstly is the Blue Star cruise ship, and looking very resplendent with the flags flying and pennants flying. It looked a lovely vessel. Another from the postcard, titled Arandora Star, the world's most delightful cruising liner, and didn't indeed look a lovely vessel. And another postcard, we think this was taken after its refit, offshore somewhere, we think in the Mediterranean. And another beautiful ship. Bearing in mind there's 1,673 people on board, at 4 a.m. on the 2nd of July, the Arandora Star departed Liverpool, heading for Newfoundland, Canada. David mentioned that there was no information in regard to where they were heading when they were in the internment camp. They were told to pack their goods. They were being shipped away, but no information given as to where. Apparently, approximately 75 miles west of Bloody Foreland in Ireland, she was torpedoed by U-boat 47, commanded by Gunther Brienne. Arandora Star is struck with a single torpedo detonating against her starboard side, flooding her aft engine room. All engine room personnel are killed, and the vessel's turbines, main generators and emergency generators are all immediately put out of action, and therefore all lights and communications aboard are out. A distress signal is sent at 7:05 hours. And as you can imagine, at that time in the morning, almost all of the people, apart from the crew, of course, were sleeping in bed. So at 7:15, Captain Moulton and his senior officers walked over the side, leaving behind many Italians who were still afraid to leave the ship. 7:20, the ship rolled over, raised her bow in the air and sank. 805 people are killed. Sergeant Norman Price said, "I could see hundreds of men clinging to the ship. They were like ants. And then the ship went up at one end and slid rapidly down, taking the men with her. Many men had broken their necks jumping or diving into the water. Somewhat miraculously, the 3 dressing brothers survived. Dad recalls walking up the main street of Greenock in Scotland, lined with onlookers, and one kind soul offered Dad a newspaper. It was the only possession he has apart from the clothing on his back, and like his brothers, he's shoeless. The Arandora Star campaign was made to make known the tragic events of June-July 1940 and the circumstances surrounding the loss of the Arandora Star. The object was to obtain an official apology from the British Prime Minister and receive compensation from many Italian families who suffered grave personal and financial loss due to the government's policy of internment, to recognise the brave contribution made to the British war effort by sons, brothers and cousins of those interned. I'm not sure the outcome of that particular campaign at this point. Thank you. There's a remarkable story about U-boat 47. It was laid down, the hull was laid down on the 25th of February 1937 at Kiel and went into service on the 17th of December 1938 under the command of Godfrey Brienne. During U-boat 47's career, she sank a total of 31 enemy vessels and damaged 8 more, and she ranks as one of the most successful German U-boats of World War II. On the 14th of October 1939, the battleship HMS Royal Oak was anchored at Scapa Flow in Orkney, northern Scotland, when she was torpedoed by U-47. The loss of the outdated ship did little to affect the numerical superiority enjoyed by the British Navy and its allies, but the sinking had a considerable effect on wartime morale. And some photos of U-47. The raid made an immediate celebrity and war hero out of the U-boat commander Godfrey Brienne, who became the first German submarine officer to be awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. Before the sinking of Royal Oak, the Royal Navy had considered the naval base at Scapa Flow impregnable to submarine attack. But U-47's raid demonstrated that the German Navy was capable of bringing the war to British home waters. The shock resulted in rapid change to dockland security and the construction of the Churchill barriers around Scapa Flow. 15th of October 1939, U-47 returns to port after sinking the HMS Royal Oak. The battleship Scharnhorst can be seen in the background. And another photo of the return. And Captain Godfrey Brienne, a handsome-looking individual at the time. The Nazi propaganda ministry was quick to capitalise on the successful raid. Brienne and his crew were immediately greeted as heroes. Hitler had sent his personal plane to bring the crew to Berlin, where he further invested Brienne with the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. This decoration was made for the first time to a German submarine officer. The survivors, including the 3 dressing brothers, are transferred to Liverpool. They were picked up by a Canadian destroyer. And by the 10th of July 1940, 8 days after the Arandora Star loss, 2,542 detainees, all classified as enemy aliens, are embarked upon HMT Dunera, almost twice the Dunera's capacity as a troop carrier of 1,600. They included 200 Italian and 251 German prisoners of war, as well as several dozen Nazi sympathisers, along with 2,036 anti-Nazis, most of them Jewish refugees. In addition to the passengers, there were 309 poorly trained guards, mostly from the Pioneer Corps, as well as 7 officers and the ship's crew. And some photos of the HMT Dunera. The internees' possessions, or what there was left of them, were rifled through and disposed of. Moreover, the 57-day voyage was made under the risk of possible attack. But it was the physical conditions and ill treatment that were the most deplorable. Internees were frequently abused, beaten and robbed by the guards. Most internees were kept below decks throughout the voyage, except for a daily 10-minute exercise period, during which internees would walk around the deck under heavy guard. During one such period, a guard smashed beer bottle on the deck so the internees would have to walk on the shards. In contrast to the army personnel, the ship's crew and officers showed kindness to the internees, and some later testified at the soldiers' courts-martial. Dad translated this novel written by S.C.H. Kleak. It tells the story of the sinking of the Arandora Star and mentions the HMT Dunera journey. There is commentary that German U-boats U-80 and U-81 shadowed Dunera, having picked up suitcases thrown overboard, and noting letters contained therein were written in German from internees. The respective captains wanted to ensure that Dunera was not attacked by other U-boats. However, a bit of research indicated that both U-80 and 81 were not in service until 1941. On the Dunera's arrival in Sydney, the first Australian on board was the Medical Army officer Alan Frost. He was appalled, and his subsequent report led to the court-martial of the Army officer in charge, Lieutenant Colonel William Scott. The Jewish people are interned in Hayes, New South Wales. Louis, Bill and Fred are interned in one of a number of internment and prisoner of war camps around Tatura and the Waranga Basin. They remained incarcerated until the German surrender, and given the choice of either returning to England or join the Australian Army, and all three chose the latter. They returned to Australia shortly after the Japanese surrender in September 1945. In his foreword in the documentary resource book, The Dunera Affair, edited by Paul Bartrop with Gabriel Eason, Western Bank Chairman, Museums Advisory Board, Victoria, wrote, "So important is it in fact, and so poignant, that this book of documents enthrall those who wish to explore in more depth how one of the greatest cargoes of talent and intellect ever to enter this country came to be here, and how they were treated en route and in Australia. Although well below the Holocaust, the Dunera experience rates high on any scale of inhumanity." Dad and the two brothers remained interned in Tatura until 1944. They were given the choice to return to the UK or join the Army. As I mentioned, all three enlisted in October 44 and discharged October 1946. It transpires the British government imposed a 99-year ban on release of any information in regard to the sinking of the Arandora Star. And not all that long ago, I contacted the Royal Navy in regard to the Arandora Star, information about the particular event, but at this point in time, have received no response. So after 1945, Louis marries Jean, two sons, David and Philip, and Louis continues as an optician, opening an office at the top end of Collins Street. Bill marries Betty, sounds like a youngster's storybook, with siblings Christine and Andrew. Bill later became the maitre d' of the club, Grilled Southern Cross Hotel, I believe in Exhibition Street. Fred married Lynn, siblings John and Barbara, Betty and Anne, and Fred became the maitre d' at Maxim's Restaurant in South Yarra. I guess the hospitality trade was well entrenched within the dressing family. But here's the rub of this particular story. Dad tells his sons nothing of his early life. And all I can remember at the time was seeing a photo of Dad and the two brothers in Australian military uniform in a photo on a piano at our home in Western Kilda. Jean passed away in around 1985 after a very short illness. And Dad rang and called a family meeting, which was fairly extraordinary at the time. And so we had my brother and his wife, Jan and I, my wife, and Dad around for dinner, and after dinner we sat around in the lounge room, and Dad produced a very worn leather suitcase. And upon opening the suitcase, a copy of the newspaper given to him walking up the main street of Greenock in Scotland is produced along with other memorabilia. And Dad tells us and our wives about his early life. Naturally, the family is gobsmacked and asked why we had not been told before. I guess from our point of view, we didn't ask either. But Dad's response was, and I quote, "I was frightened you boys would think less of me being of German heritage during the war," unquote. Louis' memorabilia has been donated to the Tatura Irrigation and Wartime Camps Museum in Tatura up near Shepparton. When Louis told us the story, I was working for the Pilkington organisation in Queen's Road, where Queen's Road, near the junction of Queen's Road and St Kilda Road. And after the Dad had told us this story, I paid a visit to the Jewish museum, which was atop the synagogue, or a synagogue in Toorak Road. And I knocked on the door and was greeted by a Jewish gentleman, and I explained to him that my father was a Dunera boy, and I was looking to do some research about it. And he welcomed me in and suggested that I go up a series of stairs to meet a lady who presumably was the librarian within the synagogue. And I explained to her why I was there, and she said, "Come with me, I think I know what you're looking for." And I can recall walking through what appeared to be no organised library. There were different pathways leading off with racks and racks and racks of books and more books. The lady went straight to the book, The Dunera Affair, which was the resource book mentioned earlier, edited by Bartrop and Gabriel Eason. In the back of the book, there is a list of German internees at Melbourne who sailed who were on the Dunera. Sure enough, there were the three dressing boys, Frederick, Herbert and Ludwig. There was a film made of the Dunera boys, and some of the names may be familiar to you. Bob Hoskins, Warren Mitchell, Mary Ann Fay and Julia Blake. And notwithstanding the mention of the name on the side, I still have a copy of the book, the film in our possession. And the lessons I've learned from this whole exercise is the short time managing a museum, but everyone has a life story. And at every opportunity, I'm suggesting that you tell your family yours. You just might not know if you haven't told them. And at every opportunity, I embrace our two sons, now aged 40 and 37, Tim and Chris, and I tell them I love them. And at every opportunity that we get together, I hug our four grandsons and whisper in their ears, "Guess what?" And they say, "What, Pa?" And I say, "I love you." And they say, "I love you too, Pa." Message I have is never stop telling your entire family that you love them. Thank you.
Now, are there any questions for Phil? If you have them, please put them up on the chat board, and I will start it off. Well, thank you, Phil, by saying, do you know what the brothers did when they served in the war, from October 44 to October 46?
No, I don't. I'm not even sure whether there was a particular, and I can't remember, I have seen it, but I can't recall the particular unit they were in, but I think it was more on the logistics side of things rather than any arms carrying service.
Right, okay. Graham asked, did the three brothers speak German or in any way identify as being German?
Indeed. Dad spoke fluent German. In fact, one of the bugbears of my life at secondary school, when I was listening and talking to my mum and dad about what courses I should take, Dad was very, very adamant that I should learn German. I could never understand why, at the time, I could never understand why he wanted me to learn German. I did exceedingly poor, I hasten to add, in the German language, and didn't take it up after not a very long time.
So I mean, he didn't, at that point, you didn't think to ask why he was speaking German and where he came from?
Not at all. Not at all.
That's what Dad did, eh?
It never occurred. I'd spent some, in 1975, went to spend some time in the UK, more on a working holiday. It was more a holiday rather than work, but I stayed with Auntie Jean, one of the siblings. They lived in Orpington in Kent, and I stayed with her for some time. And she asked me, was I aware of Dad's history? And I said, no, not at all. And nor did she tell me, but suggested that I might speak to Dad about it when I got home. Being a relatively youngster in those days, the notion of talking to your father about what he did in his youth didn't occur to me at the time.
Okay. Do you know what camps the brothers were in? This is from David.
Yes, when my wife and I paid a visit to the Tatura Museum, or the Tatura Camp Museum, and it was an interesting story. The lady named from memory is Eileen Nee, and the museum was closed at the time. This is a Sunday morning that we were staying in Shepparton, and we drove across to Tatura. And the museum was closed, but there was a note on the door saying, if you'd like to anything about the museum, ring Eileen Nee, and a number provided. So I rang the number and mentioned to Eileen that my father was a Dunera boy, and quite excitedly she said, "Don't move, stay there." And Eileen came round to the museum a very, very short time later, probably 5 minutes later, and let us into the museum. And she said, asked questions about Dad, was he a German internee, etc., etc. And I said, to the best of my knowledge, he was. And she said, well, in that case, he would have been in camp number 1. And for those of you who haven't been to the Tatura Museum, there is a number of bays, for want of better terminology, of camps 1, 2, 3, etc. And when we were looking at the photographs for camp number 1, I couldn't see any of Dad or the brothers, and couldn't make no sense of that at all. And then we continued walking through and had a look at the area identified as camp number 2, and sure enough, there's a photo of Dad and a number of other individuals in tennis apparel with their tennis rackets. And I mentioned to Eileen, I said, come on, look at this, Eileen, it's my father. I'm sure of it. I was 100% positive it was him. And she said, that's very, very strange. If he was a German internee in Camp 2, he should have been in Camp 1. Another interesting side to the story. There's another interesting fact that I took some of our museum people here from the Vietnam Veterans Museum up to the Jewish Holocaust Museum in Elsternwick, more so for us to learn how other museums operated and how they looked after their volunteers and other aspects. And as we were walking around this particular individual that we met, he introduced me to a very, very very old Jewish gentleman, and I can't remember his name, but I shook his hand and I said, my name's Phil Dressing, my father is a Dunera boy. And this elderly gentleman let go of my hand, took a step back, and I was a little bit taken aback by his body language. He took a step towards me and embraced me and said, it's wonderful to meet you. I know the Dunera story, and I'd like you to deliver, to present your oral testimony for generations to come. And so I returned to the museum sometime later and provided an oral testimony, the Jewish Holocaust Museum. And for those of you that are not aware, my understanding is they have one of the largest oral testimonies ever collected.
I have a personal message for you from David, and that is that if it was Camp Number 1, please let Phil know that I am the owner of Camp 1 and he can visit any time. So David, I don't know how to get your contact details to Phil or otherwise, but let's see, maybe you can send an email to Jason and we can pass that along.
That would be lovely.
That will work.
So if you can reply to the email with the link with the information, and that'd be great. And we have a communication from Jason, and he's got Lewis dressing. This is the Army, discharged from 5 Workers Company, 28th of October 1946. So he was in the Works Company. So they're probably doing a lot of labouring. What would they be doing in that, Jason? Labouring and what have you?
Probably. One of the other brothers, Frederick, was also in the same company, and Herbert was in the general transport company. But I've emailed all that stuff to you, Phil.
Thank you. Wonderful. Appreciate that.
It's all right.
Ian has asked the question, do you have an idea of the numbers when they had to choose between the options of enlistment or returning to the UK? In other words, who elected to go back and who went into the Australian Army?
No, I don't have the numbers, but according to Dad at the time, when given the choice, the boys were of the view that their home, London in particular, had been severely damaged by bombing during the war, and felt that going home would have been, or back to England would have been pointless. And so they chose the Australian, all 3 chose the Australian Army, and went on to lead very, very successful and wonderful lives in this country.
Just maybe one of the reasons they were in Camp 2, not Camp 1, was they actually were from England, weren't they, at the time? So were the German children or German people that were actually captured on the land in Germany and sent across?
There were certainly German prisoners of war and Italians and Jewish people escaping the Holocaust. But of course, the decision in the UK, one didn't know whether one was friend or foe. So rather than pick and choose, I think it was a matter of incarcerating all those that they could find and burn all of them, and then get them out of the country as soon as possible.
But I'm just suggesting maybe they ended up in Camp 2 because they could speak English.
Oh, well, yeah, that may well be too, yes. I never heard, funnily enough, never heard Bill or Fred speak the German language in any visitations around the dinner table. The history was never discussed. There was always other things of what was going on with each lives at the time in the past.
Okay. Are there any more questions?
Yes, please, Brent.
Okay. You don't want to do the chat? Okay, you can.
No, I can't get it to work.
All right.
Okay.
Just ask away, Jan.
Thank you. 2 things. One is my mother was up in Albury teaching at Albury Grammar School during the war years, and she got to know the Radic brothers. I don't know if David's heard of them. And I have a school friend whose father was working in the Labor Corps there. He again was an enemy alien, and they were unloading the trains because remember the gauges were different. So
Yes.
Everything that had to be unloaded at Albury to go on up or down, whatever. My question is though, one of my yachtsman scheme men, Keith Nichol, he was in the Stirling Castle going to England in 1941, and he said they had a lot of refos, which would have been there, and that they, as ordinary seamen, had to actually look after them, clean out the heads and so on. He said, when we saw them all playing chess and knew how intelligent they were. We didn't see them as being inferior at all, and we realised they were very highly intelligent and highly trained. He believes they were going back to England to help with, you know, coding the Enigma project, etc. My question to you, David, is have you ever heard of anything like that?
Sorry, have I ever
heard anything about that, that people who were on the Dunera then went back to England to help with the war effort?
No. I've never asked the question and researched the number of people that went back to the UK. There was, I think, as mentioned, there were some notable people on the Dunera on that very trip who came to Australia. Fran Stanfield, Olympic athletics.
Oh, yeah.
I think Freud's. I think it was Freud's nephew was also on board the Dunera, and numerous other very, very well educated and astute people.
Yes, thank you.
We have Jason again. David, the lady Phil was talking about was Luraline Nee, and she has 2 very good books about the camps available at Tatura Museum, I believe. So that's David again. Jan, I've got you across my screen. Is there any way I can?
I don't know.
Maybe if you. I don't know.
I put mute on. Did that help?
No. Here we go. It's all right.
There's been quite a number of books written about the Dunera affair. Not so many about the Arandora Star and the camps around the Waranga Basin. And some of you may be aware that the Dunera prison camp, prison complex, was in fact the accommodated area for German officers and prisoners of war, and they were accommodated at Dunera.
Okay. Are there any more questions of Phil?
I have a personal anecdote if you'd like to hear it. I'll keep it short. My wife's mother was a school child at Hay during the war. Her father was the bank manager. And they remember the Italians, the kids do. And there's a good story of a Navy officer escaping. Am I lost? Anyone there?
No,
so he spent a couple of nights camping out and came back and gave up. But her father, my wife's grandfather, said there were these very educated, well-to-do Jewish people who turned up at the camp and had all this banking to do, and they're allowed to come into town, do all sorts of international banking. But he said they were obviously very well-to-do. He never really knew why they just turned up in this trainload. They'd come from England. They weren't sort of locals. They weren't rounded up as part of the aliens. Just added another dimension to what was happening in the camps.
Yeah, okay. Obviously well connected. I've just pulled up who was on the Dunera boys, and interestingly enough, Warren Mitchell was on the. And it's not surprising that he played a racist part on television. He would have experienced that right firsthand.
Perhaps that's how he got the role.
I'd say he knew all about it.
There was also, just as another aside, there was a book written by H. Nielsen called The Tatura Secret Radio, and the story goes that some prisoners had managed to obtain bits and pieces to construct a radio, and they were secretly listening to how the war was going throughout Europe at the time. And despite many searches of the officers and so forth at the camps, the radio, as far as I'm aware, was never ever captured.
Peter Thompson, hang on, Graham Miller, to everyone. The officers and crew from the Cormorant sunk by the Sydney were in turn in the Tatura area as well.
Yep.
And Peter asks, is the movie still available?
Sure. If you can't get it on DVD, see if I can hold it up for you.
Okay.
It's probably coming all the other way around, perhaps. But I'd be happy to lend it to you on the course conditional time I get it back. Let me know, and I'm happy to share it.
Okay. Are there any more comments, questions? Okay, Phil. Well, thank you very much. It was a great presentation, very provoking, and very much a family affair. Oh, just on that, your father worked in optometry once he was out of the army. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes, he had an office at 105 Collins Street, where what was the Regent Hotel. I'm not too sure what it's called now. Top end of Collins Street. But another little anecdote: Dad used to travel by train to and from work. He would catch the train at St Kilda Station on the old Red Rattler and into Flinders Street, and walk from Flinders Street to the top end of Collins Street. And quite frequently he would encounter a guy by the name of Father Esmond New. Father Esmond New was the senior religious leader of the church further down Collins Street. And Dad would, according to Dad, he'd yell across Collins Street, "Morning, Esmond, how are you today?" And Esmond would say, "I'm fine, Louis, how about you?" And Louis said that he responded, "I'm 100%. And the good Reverend would answer back, "Well, you're no good to me then."
All right, well, thank you. In the next couple of days, we'll be sending out a 3-minute survey, feedback survey. Thanks to everyone who filled out the last survey, and I hope you do it again. We take notice. Now, for other MHHV business, our next speaker event will be on Wednesday, March the 31st. It'll be about the book Secret and Special, the Z Special Unit in World War II, and the speaker will be author Will Davies. And this is the untold story of Z Special Unit and operations, the precursor to the elite SAS, and the extraordinary feats they undertook in the Pacific during World War II. So that's on March the 31st, and we're sending out plenty of notices as always. The Zoom presentation after that on Wednesday, May the 5th, will be Niche Wars, Australia and Afghanistan and Iraq, 2001 to 2014. And that will be, the speaker will be Professor John Blaxland, and this is out of the proceedings of an MHHV conference that we ran in Brisbane in 2016, I believe. It doesn't really matter the date. It was very well attended, lots of heavy hitters. So that'll be very interesting. While the speaker program is going to be continuing on through the year at about 6 weekly intervals, sadly, our conferences have had to be postponed due to travel uncertainties. We have, obviously, in our conferences, we bring people from interstate, and they're not willing to come if they going to get marooned in Victoria or some other place. We'll bring you news of that when that comes available. Hopefully, we'll get one in before the end of the year. And that brings this evening's session to a close. And thank you again very, very much, Phil. Thanks also to Jason, who keeps us going behind the scenes and is unflappable when such things as presentations don't work. So thank you, Jason. And thank you all for joining us. Hope to see you again, and good night to you from the committee and myself.